Hello.
Hello, Mr. Farrell.
Hi.
Hi.
How's it going tonight?
Yeah, it's pretty good.
It's great to have you on.
Thank
we
you.
have some interesting topics to get on tonight. I know there's some listeners very excited to hear about this.
Are we live now?
Yes. We are live now, yes.
Oh, okay.
Right. It's the thing with Blog Talk Radio. That's how it works. When I have to call out, it connects the person automatically. It's actually kind of a pain. We're never happy with Blog Talk Radio, but some reason we're still here on Blog Talk Radio. But it is what it is. So then I am joined by with my co-host Jeff Giles and Mark Cummins.
Hello, sir.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Hello, Joseph.
Hi.
Virtually meeting you, I guess.
Yep.
Awesome. So, wow. So you've written quite a few books, I guess, and.
Well, at last count, I think there's 22.
Wow.
Yeah. And working on a few more.
Yes, and I think last time we had you on, you were either in the middle of working on a book or releasing it. And have you?
I think it was last spring, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I was just finishing up a book that's out now called Thrice Great Hermetica and the Janus Age. I think it came out probably within a month after we last talked, so it hasn't been out that long.
Okay. Well, now I know I need to pick that book up. I wasn't sure. I got on Amazon just to check real quick earlier to see if it had been released, and I didn't see it on Amazon. So that's why.
It's there. It's there. If you go onto my website in the web store, it's up in the web store. So
okay,
it's on Amazon now.
Perfect.
And what's the name of your website? Just so everybody knows.
www.gizadeathstar.com.
That's an awesome name.
Thank you.
Yes. True story.
So, before we get into those topics and everything, there's a couple of things we want to go down in the news to kind of want to know your opinions on this. Since you've been on, there's been some things that went on recently. There was a bone. What was it? On Mars, they found a bone on Mars. I can't remember what part of the.
You're not going to believe this. I just today saw that.
Really?
Just today. Yeah, just today. About 3 hours ago, somebody sent me an email with the picture of this thing. And I have to be honest, it does look like a bone. Whether it's a rock that looks like a bone or a bone that looks like a bone is hard to tell right now. But, what raises a suspicion in my mind is something different, actually. A few months ago, I think it was after the last time we talked, a few months ago, NASA, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, I believe it was, came out with a story. It was a really odd one. They came out with a story that the JPL had scanned something on Mars and 3D printed it here on Earth to take a look at it.
Oh, okay.
And, the usual spin in the story was, okay, they're doing this just to test the viability of the technology over long distances, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, no. You don't go to all that expense, to beam stuff back to Earth and then 3D print it. So what I suspect, and again, it's a suspicion, nothing more than that. I don't have any evidence to back up the suspicion, but my suspicion is that they saw something unusual and, used 3D scanning technology, which implies something else, that if they're scanning something up there and 3D printing it down here, then that means they've got a 3D scanner up there on their little rovers.
Good point.
And if that's the case, then are they going to be scanning an ordinary rock to look at it? My intuition tells me no, probably not.
Probably not.
So they're, whatever they're doing, they're not telling the full story. It would be my opinion. But I did see that strange looking rock thing that looks like a bone, and I have to admit, it looks like a bone.
It really does. It definitely looks like a bone. There's no doubt about it. So I thought that's interesting, though. It might be, because of course I'm a big Hoagland fan, so I'm sure that he was very happy about that.
I don't know. I haven't heard from him in months and months. I don't know why there's so much radio silence from him. I don't listen to Coast to Coast much anymore, so I don't know if he's been on that show. But usually when he's this silent, it means he's working on some big project. So
okay. And I was wondering, because I emailed him for last Friday, so I haven't heard back from him. So I was kind of wondering. But so yeah. Well, hopefully he is.
Yeah.
I'm always excited to hear what he's got going on. So,
right,
I will be happy to hear from him. Another thing in the news, I think this was today. There was an unmanned space rocket that exploded on liftoff.
Yeah, and again, you caught me. You caught me just having heard of that story. I didn't have time before your show to really look at that story, but I did see the story. So again, all I can give you is my suspicion, and again, no evidence to back this up whatsoever, other than a history of some very curious things concerning space. If that was a commercial rocket that blew up, and it was on its way to the International Space Station, with all of the tensions going on between the United States and Russia right now, it does, at least to my mind, without knowing anything more about it, it does at least raise the possibility that there might be some sabotage going on, that somebody doesn't want these private ventures to get off the ground, quite literally. And the reason I say that is there's been a hypothesis out there in some of the alternative community for some years that there was a string of launch failures in the Soviet Union, one particularly colossally bad and tragic one at the Baikonur Cosmodrome back in the 1960s, that a Russian booster exploded on launch and killed several killed several technicians and scientists. And there's always been the allegation in some circles that this may have been American sabotage, raising the question of what human on-the-ground resources did we have inside the Soviet Union, that deeply inside the Soviet Union, that could pull something off. And then there's been more recently when the Russians lost their Phobos 2 Grunt probe that they were sending to Mars. I think that was, 2010, 2011, somewhere in there. The head of Roscosmos got on to, I think it was either RT or RIA Novosti, I forget which one, and kind of raised the possibility that they were looking at deliberate sabotage of bad computer parts that had been slipped into their satellite and so on and so forth. A Russian general at the time in their air defense command even went further and suggested that some sort of radar interference had brought down the Phobos satellite, and clearly kind of suggesting that it was more American activity. So there's been a history of these things and a history of allegations of that sort. So time will tell as we learn more of the story.
For sure. Go ahead, Mark.
So at this point, you see that you think that there might be some sort of foul play, if you will, or something fishy.
Yeah, I certainly hold open the possibility without knowing more about the story. I'd certainly hold open the possibility.
Sure.
And it would not surprise me. I would definitely not
surprise me either.
And speaking of rockets, space, it was a recent mission. It was kind of a secret mission. There was a space shuttle that just returned recently that they're not telling us what they went and did. I'm curious to hear what you think about that.
Well, that's a mystery to me. You're talking about that little unmanned Air Force.
Yeah.
It looks like a little miniature space shuttle. It's a pilotless drone space shuttle that they send up. And they sent this. It just returned, if I remember the story correctly, it just returned from about a 2-year mission. And this could be, quite frankly, I'm mystified as to what these secret missions might be for. And I have a variety of hypotheses. It might be that this craft has some sort of grab and snab capability. In other words, they can send it up and get near to someone else's satellite and literally pluck it out of orbit and bring it back down to study.
Yeah.
That would be extremely risky because, of course, those other nations would know immediately that one of their satellites was missing. So I'm a little skeptical of that hypothesis. It could also be that it has a launch capability to put small satellites into orbit. It could also be that they're performing some sort of experiments in low gravity. For example, growing crystals in low gravity. That would be one thing, and that would account for why it may have been up there for so long. So there's any number of things that they could be doing with that thing. It's, without them giving more data and sharing more about that particular technology, we don't really know.
Exactly. I surely don't, but it definitely does interest me. I know. I actually was listening to Coast the other night, and George I can't remember who the guest was, but it was somebody from the Army, and he had asked him about it, and the guest said that he knew what it was about, but he couldn't tell anybody that it was top secret. So who knows?
Well, if they're that tight-lipped about it, it has to be a rather extraordinary mission and or technology that they're using up there in conjunction with that thing. Again, it may even be that it's some sort of test bed for space-based weapons, or perhaps test bed for Earth-based weapons to see how they can perform that high up into space against targets. Who knows? It could be any number of things.
Right. So, yes.
Lots of room for speculation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess moving. Okay, so yeah, those are my 3 questions for things in the news. I just wanted to know what you thought about them. They've been
that's my speculation of the day.
Perfect. Yeah. So of course, I mean, you've got a bunch of books out, but I know that you have. I don't know. You have like, what is it, like maybe 5 or 6 that are kind of like a series of books that you've been doing.
Well, actually, they're all a series. I write.
Okay.
Yeah, all the books are written in a deliberate sequence. The order doesn't look like it, but they're all written to be in a certain sequence, and they're all written to dovetail each to the other. But within that overarching series, there's several kind of little sub-series of books in it,
Excellent. Go ahead, Mark. Sorry.
Was the name of your website, that was the name of one of your books, correct? That wasn't your first book, though.
The first book was a book called The Giza Death Star. And
it was. Okay.
Yeah, and there's actually 3 books in that little kind of mini-series. It's The Giza Death Star, The Giza Death Star Deployed, and then The Giza Death Star Destroyed. And when I finally decided to do a website, I just decided to name it after those books that kind of kicked off the whole series.
Okay, makes sense.
So, as of right now, what are your top interests right now that you're researching?
Well, I don't generally comment on what I'm researching at any given moment because the reason why is I put a lot of work in my books, and I really don't like to be scooped, So I generally hold all that very close to the chest until I actually get a book manuscript. When I know it's at the printer, then I usually tell people what the next book is going to be and what the title is and so on. I can generally indicate that my coming areas of inquiry are going to be related again to banking and finance. They're going to be related to the connection between consciousness and physics, and I'm going to be doing something on Nazis once again. So I'm doing kind of 3 different areas all at the same time right now.
Nice. And
or at least a couple subjects that you have touched on in the past. You've certainly done a wide variety of different subjects and material. Do you have a favorite? Do you have like a one thing that sticks out the most, or whatever, that you focus on the most?
In all of those books, there's 2 or 3 themes that kind of unite them all. One of them is this connection between consciousness and physics. It's something that in some of my books I've referred to as the topological metaphor of the medium, because I happen to think that if one peels away the metaphysical and philosophical language of a lot of philosophical and ancient religious texts, what you're looking at, if you look at the structure of it, what you're looking at is a metaphor that's profoundly mathematical in nature. And I think, just to be country simple about it, I think that this comes from high antiquity, and that it probably entered a period of decline where the only way to talk about it was through the language of religion and philosophical metaphysics. That's one theme. The other theme that is kind of a consistent runner through the books is the struggle between good and evil, and more particularly the struggle between good elites and bad elites. That's certainly something that I picked up very early in the Giza Death Star series, and that really follows through all of the books. The third one that is rather obvious is I spend a lot of time in my books pointing out that the Third Reich, in my opinion, quite literally attempted to revive or restore or to uncover some of that ancient thinking and ancient science. The Nazi theme is certainly one of the. It's a favorite theme of mine, but not in the sense that I like Nazis or anything.
Right.
I just.
No, I understand.
Know your enemy.
Yeah, know your enemy. Thank you.
Right.
Because I do think people are under an extraordinary degree of misapprehension about the importance of that period of human history and the even more astonishing story of how they did not go quietly into the night, but took some long-term steps to ensure the survival of their ideology and pardon me, and some of their scientific projects after the war. I think that's a hugely crucial story, and it's one that impacts in a major fashion the post-war financial structure of the West, and that's another part of the story that people don't like to talk about, but I don't think you can adequately understand what's going on without that component.
Right.
Another meme that I've been pursuing in the book, in the various books, is this idea of not only have you had throughout human history hidden elites, but those elites most always are connected to secretive financial activity and secretive technological activity at one and the same time. So those are kind of the four areas that if people read all the books, they'll discover those themes popping up over and over again.
Okay. So Joseph, we're talking about here, I guess, the topic of Nazis are coming up now, so I got to ask this. And we were talking about Mars earlier, so it brought to mind. Now, first off, have you ever seen that interview? It was with David Icke and Arizona Wilder.
No.
Okay. Well, she claims to be a victim of abuse, of I guess ritualistic abuse and mind control and all that stuff or whatever. And
right.
In it, she claims that the Aryans came from Mars a long time ago, and that the reptiles followed them here, and they actually require the blood of the Aryans, which are supposedly from Mars, to keep their shape. And I thought that was kind of unusual, but I also thought it was interesting because if you look at like what you say with the Nazis, with Hitler and all, he wanted to make it so everybody had Aryan blood in them, blonde hair, blue eyes. So to me, that all made sense. I don't know.
Well, I'm not a big follower nor subscriber to Mr. Icke's ideas. As for rings of ritual abuse and mind control, there's no doubt in my mind that those rings are there, and I happen personally to think that the network is probably of global extent for various reasons, but thus far I haven't commented much in public on it because I haven't researched the topic sufficiently to have anything new to say other than what other people have said out there. I'd be very wary of really radical hypotheses. Now that said, it's interesting if you go to the Zulu tribe in South Africa, their own tribal myths indicate, and I believe I mentioned this in Cosmic War and perhaps Gene's Giants, Monsters, and Men. It was one other book. I don't remember which one right off the top of my head. But in their tribal myths, they very clearly state that ultimately they came from Mars, which kind of throws a cocked hat into the Aryan story because, of course, the Zulus are black. But they claim that their tribe came to Mars on ships, or came to Earth from Mars on ships. There's no two ways to get around it. I do think there's something odd about the connection of Mars in the human imagination, that it should so consistently be present in human thought all the way from Greece to Rome and other cultures, and in every case the association of Mars, even back in Mesopotamia, the association of the planet to war and to
right.
Conquest and things of that sort. It's a fairly universal meme. The question is, why is it there? And it's interesting, Hoagland at one point in his earlier researches would often make the statement, we may well find out that we are the Martians. And I think there's a little bit of evidence to suggest that fact. For one thing, the human circadian rhythm seems to be more adapted to a Martian environment than to an earthly one. But, just little odd things like that. But beyond that, I can't really speculate. I don't know. There's certainly the presence of Mars in human lore that has yet, in my opinion, to be adequately explained.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Ike. Don't really follow him that well, right? But that was a very interesting interview. And if any of the listeners want to have nightmares tonight, you can go ahead and seriously search. The title of the interview was called "Interview with a Mother Goddess." I believe that's what it was called. Oh no, I'm sorry. It was called "Revelations of a Mother Goddess." It was called "Revelations of a Mother Goddess." Yeah. That was scary. That was I wouldn't suggest watching it before you go to sleep. Seriously. No, I posted on Facebook that I had a dream the other night where Mark Dice was at my house and he was like trying to steal something of mine. Something that I was going to like make a video or something. He was gonna, and I kept trying. I was like battling him for a couple hours, and then I like caught him in a bunch of rope and tied him up, and he broke free of it, and he turned into a reptile.
Well, I suggest you not undergo Jungian psychotherapy for that dream.
Oh no, I wasn't scared in my dream. I mean, I woke up right after, but I don't really get scared when monsters, attack me in my dreams anymore. I usually like beat them up. Which is great. No more fear of dreams. So giants.
Right.
I would love to talk about giants.
We got into it a little bit with John B. Wells on the last show, and but we didn't get too deep into it because we covered so much with him on the show. But this is a great time to get into it.
Okay.
Well, what do you want to know?
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeff.
Are they actually the offspring of fallen angels, or is that just a metaphor to make them sound more mysterious and powerful than what they might just, or are they just the offspring of aliens who would like to consider themselves gods?
Well, I think it's a bit of all of them. My own approach has always been with those stories to assume that if you look at some of those Mesopotamian texts in particular, one set of texts is called the Karsag tablets, K-H-A-R-S-A-G. They were published by Yale University Press under the title Miscellaneous Babylonian Texts. The scholar that published them was a fellow by the name of William Barton. I have a copy of that, and it's the texts are in so-so condition. There are major portions of the tablets that were missing when he published his translation and photographs of them. But if you look at them, the people that did kind of the most close examination of those texts from this alternative research point of view were Christopher and I think Mary was his wife's name, O'Brien, in a book called The Genius of the Few. that I reviewed in Genes, Giants, Monsters, and Men. It's really a rather astonishing book. It costs an arm and a leg, but in my opinion, it's worth every penny. And what they do is they go through the text very carefully and point out that certain allusions in the text are probably describing some sort of technology that you would be using for gene splicing and genetic engineering. They're reading of one particular portion of the text that talks about the something, if I'm paraphrasing from poor memory here, something the seeing eye or the light eye or something like this, and in their reconstruction they think this is a microscope. Well, certainly a microscope would be a technology that you'd want to have if you're going to do genetic engineering, but it sounds to me more like it may be a gene sequencer, which uses, of course, spectrography and other things to read genetic code. But it's clear from the text that you're dealing with a story of genetic engineering of man. So my assumption has always been that when you're dealing with those stories, first of all, to make the genetic engineering easy, what you're probably dealing with is another branch of the human species or the human genus. So in other words, we may have genetic cousins out there that look a great deal like us, and that would have made the process of engineering some sort of chimerical offspring much easier. The interesting thing that I pointed out in Genes, Giants, Monsters, and Men is that in the Karsag tablets, what you have is 14 human donor mothers and one male, quote-unquote, God donor on the God side of the equation that create and manipulate modern man into existence. Now, that's interesting because if you look at some of the recent genetic research that's been conducted in trying to describe the historical evolution of human haplogroups, the work of Brian Sykes pointed out that you have 13 parent female haplogroups within humanity. Those in turn which come from a common human mother that they assume to be kind of a mitochondrial Eve, all right? And one male donor. Now, the problem more recently in genetics, in other words, you have slight, very, very loose corroboration of that particular ancient story right there. But there's another more amazing one. If you look at what geneticists are saying right now about the origins of humanity, they're saying that modern Homo sapiens sapiens originated sometime circa 150,000 years ago. That's as early as they've been able to date mitochondrial Eve. In other words, the common genetic mother that we all share. But when they look at the Y chromosome in human males, they're now talking about Y chromosomal Adam as being almost 150,000 years older than the emergence of modern man. So, take that for whatever that's worth. But that's an interesting thing in itself because that would place the origins of Y chromosomal Adam somewhere around 250,000 years ago, give or take a few thousand years. Now that to me is very interesting in and of itself because it looks like another very, very loose corroboration of some of those ancient stories. And the ancient story that I'm thinking about in particular is the so-called Sumerian Kings List, which if you read it, dates the beginning when kingship descended from heaven, is the way they put it,
right,
to circa 243,000 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So in other words, while academics were busily dismissing, philologists and so on were busily dismissing the Sumerian Kings List as a bit of wild Mesopotamian science fiction, Modern genetics appears to be giving us these little weird little clues,
right,
that maybe it's not so wild after all. We don't really know, but I just find that very interesting corroboration of a very loose sort of some of those ancient texts.
Wow, so that would date Sumeria a lot farther back than 7,000 years ago.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and that's always been my suspicion because, let's be honest, the academic paradigm is that modern man has been around for about 150,000 years, and for about 140,000 years of it, all we were doing was hunting and gathering.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, we decided to quit hunting and gathering and build these
societies,
these immense civilizations like Sumer and Egypt and the Indus Valley. And moreover, when we decided to do that, all of a sudden, and for no good reason, we decided to invent mathematics and agriculture and animal domestication. And,
right. Out of nowhere, it just happened.
Out of thin air, So the assumption, of that paradigm to me is just highly suspect. These societies themselves, Egypt in particular, always refer to themselves as legacies of something that occurred much earlier than them. So in other words, they're telling you that they're declined legacies of a much higher civilization that pre-existed them. The problem being, well, where is it and what was it, But I think there's enough indications on planet Earth that something was here of a technologically sophisticated sort, predating those civilizations. I mean, my word, look at the ruins of Pumupunku that I talk about in Genes, Giants, Monsters, and Men. The ruins themselves are usually dated by various people between 10,000 and 30,000 years ago. And you look at the stones that are machined there, the great big H blocks, they're not only machined and they're not only gigantic, but they're machined with an extraordinary precision that implies that they had some sort of technology that went way beyond the Incas. So, So yeah, there's indications of this all over the world. So yeah, I think if you keep an open mind, you have to look at all this evidence and conclude that there's some sort of connection between that activity and then what happens to spring up rather suddenly in Mesopotamia and Egypt.
Okay. So what's your take on the whole hybrid bloodline? Like the as you would, the quote-unquote elite, as it's claimed that they have alien DNA in them and et cetera.
Well, it's complicated because by elite, I'm assuming you mean the Western elite. And the problem, and don't get me wrong, I set out when I started researching Genes, Giants, Monsters, and Men, my working hypothesis was that the elites are looking for some sort of modern genetic confirmation of all of these ancient stories, number one, and number two, are possibly looking for confirmation that they may carry some of that non-human or non-terrestrial DNA. All right. Now, I was able to verify the first more or less because I just pointed out you have the modern geneticists coming up with these odd, loose corroborations of some of these ancient stories. I was not able to find any direct confirmation of the second hypothesis. The problem, as far as modern genetics goes, for the elite bloodline white supremacy hypothesis, is that the Caucasian race, oddly enough, emerges more or less late in the game in terms of the emergence of human haplogroups. The black race is much older. Orientals are older. And the white race, in addition to its rather late emergence, seems to be the most bastardized of them all. The idea of genetic purity, in that sense, kind of goes out the window. I mean, it's anything but. But the odd thing there again is you look at, and I'll be honest with you guys, I've been looking and looking and looking for an answer to this one, and I can't really find anybody that explains it satisfactorily. If you look at the Caucasian peoples, basically the European peoples, oddly enough, they have the most problems with Rh negative blood and things like that. Other human populations don't have near the problems with that. You have yet another mutation occurring somewhere around the Black Sea that introduces blue eyes into the European stock. And on top of all of that, being the youngest of and most mixed in terms of its genetic composition, the most mixed of human races, by the same odd token, and even more weirdly, the Caucasian race appears to have the oldest of the blood types of the human race, the 4 blood types. So racially the youngest, blood types the oldest. What does this mean?
That is very strange.
It's very, very strange. How do you explain this on a standard Darwinian model? And I got to be honest with you guys, I've looked and I've looked and I've looked. Maybe I'm not looking in the right places. That's always a possibility. But I haven't found anyone that's willing to go there, and I just don't know what to make of that either. So I do think, all my suspicion is I do think that they are looking for some sort of genetic confirmation of these ancient stories. Everything that I've researched, and I even put a bit about it in this last book that just came out, everything tells me that they are, but I haven't found anything of a scientific or genetic nature to confirm that hunch yet.
So you suspect? So what is your suspicions? I don't want you to speculate and throw it out there, but.
Well, my suspicion, quite frankly, is that those ancient stories have truth in them. That there's some possibility of the external and deliberate manipulation of the human species. Toward what end? I'm not really certain. The ancient stories are all the way from Mesopotamia to Plato and to the Bible and to some of the Mesopotamian texts, even the Egyptian texts kind of hint at it, that when the gods or whoever created man, they initially created man far too intellectually capable that mankind quickly became a threat to the power of whoever made mankind. So they had to go back in. Yeah, they had to go back in and retinker with mankind to dumb him down.
Of course. I think they went too far on that.
Yeah, well, that may be true too. Yeah, there's quite a lot of evidence in history for that.
We need an upgrade.
They went a little too far on the opposite end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So, I remember, I don't know where I heard this before. I'm hoping you can correct me here, or at least from my perspective. Okay, so the giants, the Nephilim or whatever, when they were first here, they caused a lot of ruckus back in the day, and they were eating people and going crazy and destroying stuff. And then supposedly, this is how I know it. And then there was that giant flood that killed everybody just so they could kill the giants. And supposedly the souls of the giants, they weren't allowed to reincarnate. And the souls of the giants are now on another dimension, and they're tormenting people, and that's what people refer to as demons now, the souls of those giants. Is that true?
Well, I don't even get into any metaphysical speculations in any of my books.
Okay.
I have a lot of.
Have you heard this before, though?
Oh yes, I've heard it many times. Yeah,
Okay.
I've heard it many times. Usually things like that I tend to avoid in my books, not because I'm not a believer in spiritual things or metaphysical realities or what have you. I have a lot of suspicions and philosophical problems with reincarnation, for example. But let's look at it this way. If you look at the stories and allegations about giants, in some cases, in my book, The Cosmic War, I even put in a diagram of some of the archaeological texts from early Enlightenment France, where they're describing giants of 36 feet height. In other words, extremely tall, 6 times as tall as modern man. And you look at these stories, you find stories of giants in North American Indian lore and in South American Indian lore. You find it in the Greeks. You find it all over the place. And to my mind, when you've got that kind of lore, there's been academic attempts to explain it away and say, well, these people were just really mixed up and they were looking at big, huge bones of dinosaurs and, concluding that these were giants. Well, I don't think so. And the reason I don't think so is that human rationality is remarkably consistent through the ages. I don't believe the people back then were as dumb as the dumb people now say they are.
Right. No, I agree with you there.
So let's look at giants. In my book, The Cosmic War, I pointed out that if you look at Dr. Van Flander's exploded planet hypothesis, he believes that the asteroid belt is the remnant of an exploded planet that occurred millions of years ago in this solar system. And this is actually a hypothesis that, if you look carefully enough at some of the ancient texts, seems to be corroborated rather nicely. But he hypothesized that this planet would have been about approximately 2 times the mass of the Earth, and that it was a solid water-bearing planet. Now, if you can imagine that this planet was inhabited by intelligent humanoid life forms, then in that kind of higher gravity, one of 2 evolutionary possibilities comes to mind. Either that people in that higher gravity, 2 times the mass of the Earth is going to be like experiencing somewhere between 2 and 3 Gs as a constant experience. So either they're either going to be very short people and kind of flattened out, or conversely, they might be very tall people with immense bones and a very heavy bone structure. So, in that sense, the story of giants makes a little sense to me. So I don't think we have to go to speculations about reincarnating souls and all of that stuff. That's certainly there in the lore. I'm simply trying to look at it from the standpoint of bones and ancient stories and how the 2 might go together.
Right. No, that's interesting, because I remember reading this once too as well, that during the time of dinosaurs, of course, the oxygen levels may have been different, the air, and maybe humans at that point in time were just much larger because of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if they existed at the time of dinosaurs at all. I mean, there's always been that kind of crazy evangelical fundamentalist school that says that the Earth is about 4,000 years old or what have you, and that dinosaurs are not that old and that they shared the Earth with mankind. Well, I'm not of that school. Right. You've got Richard Thompson and Michael Cremo in their book Forbidden Archaeology. Yep. It's a wonderful book. If your listeners don't know it, that's definitely a book.
Yeah, we've had Michael Cremo on the show.
Oh, excellent.
Yes.
They present a a pretty substantial case that there was some sort of intelligent hominid humanoid life form on Earth before the rise of modern man, and they produce evidence of machined objects that are millions of years old, and in one case they produce evidence of this little coin that was discovered in stratigraphy within Illinois that would have dated it to approximately 240,000 years ago. And again, I thought that was a very interesting discovery because that is yet another little time sequence corroboration of the Sumerian Kings list. And you have these little indicators around the world that something may be horribly wrong with the academic paradigm of human prehistory.
Oh yeah.
Wow. So
which is why I'm writing these very weird books. because I'm not satisfied with those paradigms either.
Right. And it's from what I know, you don't base your conclusions off the writings of Zecharia Sitchin either, right?
Well, Sitchin is no, I don't. But Sitchin is certainly influential. One of the things I deliberately started out in the Giza Death Star books was Sitchin certainly had an influence on the formation of that hypothesis, but not
right.
in the sense that he inspired the hypothesis in me, but rather that I had always kind of held the hypothesis individually by myself.
Right.
And then when I read him, I thought, oh wow, somebody else is thinking the same thing.
Right.
The reason I avoid Sitchin is that academics have raised some severe problems with some of his translations. Now, I know the academic blizzard of footnotes game very well. It's always easy to discredit someone by claiming that you're an expert in this particular field of linguistics, and he's translated this wrong, and therefore you're supposed to bow before authority and dismiss everything he says.
Right.
So, I know how that game is played. I don't like playing it because I think really it's a case of let's nitpick about the leaves on the tree and not look at the forest. So in the Giza Death Star books, and in the book The Cosmic War, what I did very deliberately was I used English language translations of academics themselves. Stephanie Daly, her Mesopotamian, wonderful translations of Mesopotamian texts. I've used some others that were printed by Yale University. So in other words, I was using academically approved English translation texts, and then just said, okay, let's sit down and read these stories in academically approved translations and see what they say.
Yeah.
So, in other words, let's avoid all this nitpicking about Akkadian and Assyrian and so on and so forth, and see what the stories say. Do they suggest a science? And again, my conclusion was yes, they suggest a science if you read them and are willing to read them in a certain way. Now the problem, just linguistically, that I have with philological nitpicking is that anybody that has studied those languages, Akkadian or Assyrian and so on, will tell you, and you can actually Google this term, that these languages make heavy use of a phenomenon that academics call paronomisia, P-A-R-O-N-A-M-I-S-I-A. Paronomisia is simply the idea that these ancient languages constructed their ideograms with a deliberate, multi-layered symbolic complex behind them. So in other words, you look at certain combinations of kineograms, and they can mean about 10 different things. And if you stop and think about the 10 different layers of meaning, they're all kind of related analogically to each other. So translation becomes it becomes a very iffy business to begin with. So take that for whatever it's worth. I avoid Sitchin, but at the end of the game, I in a kind of loose fashion, corroborate what he's saying. And basically what he's saying is these texts could be telling us something scientifically true. Where I part company with Sitchin dramatically is, he's got his old Planet X Nibiru thing of a planet careening into the solar system every 3,160 years, and it comes from off the plane of the ecliptic, roars through the solar system. Well, my problem with that is simple physics. If that were the case, you'd see the planets in orbit around the sun showing signatures of the gravitational effect that such an event would have. They'd be bobbing like fishing bobbers on a pond.
Right.
And they don't do that, at least not to my mind. They don't do that sufficiently. The other problem I have... Pardon me?
I'm sorry. I was just compulsively interrupting. I'm sorry. And could it be that it hasn't even started, it's way out in the solar system and it's going to be another 100, 150 years?
No, it wouldn't,
okay.
because what he's talking about is a cyclical event that has already happened previously in history, and you'd still see a gravitational signature from that event. And I'm sorry, I'm just not convinced of it. Okay. It's a particular construction, I think, that he's placed on the texts rather than derived from them. The second problem I have with him is that he's thinking in terms of a technology that really, if you stop and think about it, isn't adequate to the scenario he's proposing. In other words, he's proposing rocket ships and nuclear weapons and so on and so forth. Well, rocket ships are, quite frankly, they're just not a practical means for interstellar regular communications between planets. I mean, we can lob a few probes at things, but in terms of the kind of colonization and commercial exploitation scenario he describes in his works, they're just, it's ridiculous. And nuclear weapons, well, if you're dealing with some of the physics that to me seems to be suggested in the text, nuclear weapons are a pop gun. For one thing, you're not going to be able to blow apart an entire planet with them. Which seems to me to be suggested in the text. It seems to me to be capably argued by Dr. Van Flandern. So you're going to have to look for some other sort of technology capable of doing that. And if you've got the technology to blow up planets, probably you've got a propulsion and transport technology that far exceeds rockets. So I have problems of that sort with a lot of what Sitchin says.
Okay. All right, Mr. Farrell, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break real fast and come back and talk about these cosmic wars. I have a couple questions. I'm sure they do too. Okay, so we'll be right back then. All right.
All right, I'll be back in 5 minutes.
All right.
Okay.
Oh, man, I haven't seen a single one. How about you, Kevin?
I haven't seen a doggone thing all day, Nick. And you know what? I'm not that happy about it either.
Oh, got one. MQ-1 Predator coming in hot. 33 degrees northwest, altitude 1984.
Oh, yeah. These birdies.
God, Benny, you're always able to find the most beautiful drones. How do you do it? Well, Nick, there is a secret to my success. The new drone spotting app from SIA. It can find even the most rare and exotic drones, like
Switchblade, Dragonfly, Liberty Bell, RQ-7 Shadow, Hummingbird, Freedom Hunter, Dark Star, Sand Trigger, Stalker, Pegasus, Seeker, Columbus Micro, T-666, Magic Bullet, Prom Night, Anwar al-Awlaki, Messenger of Death, Al-Qaeda Sniffer, Snow Goose, Pocket Rocket, X-56, Barack Obama, No Mercy, Bushwhacker, Headhunter, Old Glory, Widowmaker 3, Flying Zion, All-Seeing Spy, Boom, Air Force One, Osama bin Laden, Whale, Phantom Sentinel, Hillary Clinton, and many more.
Freedom Hunter, 9 o'clock.
looks like it's coming right at us. Oh, I knew we shouldn't have gone drone spotting in Yemen.
drone spotting app, available on both Android and iPhone.
By sea.
And we are back to Into the Black Hole podcast. We are joined by our guest, Dr. Joseph P. Farrell, and we are about to get into the subject of cosmic wars. Before we, this would have to do with it, sort of. I'm kind of wondering about this. Richard Hoagland, I've heard him talk about it on Coast to Coast before. He says you can take a pair of night vision goggles and look up to the sky, and you can actually see, I don't know, like spacecraft or whatever flying around at night. I'm curious if you've ever tried that, or if you think there's any truth to that.
Well, I haven't tried it. I can't afford night vision goggles.
Same here.
One doesn't get rich in this business, as you probably know. But I know several people that have done that and have seen some rather astonishing things. So I don't doubt that people are seeing all sorts of stuff going on up there. I've seen some intriguing videos from some of this stuff. So no, I don't have any problem with people that have looked up there and seen something. It's just I haven't.
Have you ever seen UFOs? I have.
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to make you more comfortable. Yeah.
My first answer is always when people ask me, "Have you ever seen a UFO?" And my answer is yes. Every time there's a full moon, and I'm not joking. The moon, if you stop and consider the physics of what it's doing, is doing a rather astonishing thing. If it was captured, as some scientists believe it was, then its orbit, if it enters the gravity well of the Earth, then it's going to speed up as it gets closer to Earth, and then as it flies by, it's going to start to slow down. So the orbit of an object captured like that should be much more elliptical than it is. So in other words, if it was a captured object with a circular orbit, a nearly circular orbit around the Earth, which in addition to that, it revolves on its own axis, but revolves in such a period that we never see more than 60% of the surface of the moon, and it's always the same surface. So, figuring out the orbital mechanics of all of that simply by capture, that's piling up a lot of coincidences. So in other words, the real bottom line is that for the moon, if it's a captured object to be in that kind of orbit, then someone slowed it down and parked it there.
Right, I've heard this before.
I'm not the first to say this. Isaac Newton, his complaint was that the moon is the only thing that gave him a headache. Isaac Asimov pointed out Russian scientists back in the Soviet era in the 1960s just came right out and hypothesized in some of their scientific magazines that it was a big artificial object, or at least had been steered there. So that's my first answer. But yes, I've also seen a more conventional UFO thing a couple of years ago.
Okay. So, think there's any link to these beings as far as giants goes?
I don't know. I really don't know. What I saw, I'm kind of hard-headed about this. With one or two exceptions, I can't think of any UFO case that absolutely compels me to conclude that it must necessarily be an extraterrestrial technology. What I saw was certainly interesting. It was certainly technologically sophisticated, but the signature I saw was not a signature sufficient to suggest to me that this thing is coming here from Alpha Centauri.
Right.
In other words, at best, all I can say is that's an advanced technology. Whose it is, I don't know. It could be human, could be somebody else's. I simply don't know.
I agree. Same boat there. Yeah.
Can you go into what you saw?
I did in a book called Covert Wars and Clash of Civilizations. Okay. Basically, I was walking late at night. I'm a night owl, guys. So I was, I'm usually up until 5 or 6 in the morning, and I was living in Spearfish, South Dakota at the time, which is right on the northern tip of the Black Hills, kind of about 15 miles from the Wyoming border. And to the west of Spearfish, there's this big, tall, 6,000 feet tall mountain on the South Dakota side called Crow's Peak. And about 2:30 in the morning, I walked down to our little local 24-hour convenience store to get a Coke and walk down there, and on my way back, I'm kind of walking up the hill, and I see the silhouette of the mountains off in the distance, real dark. And then I saw this strobing thing that would have been, from where I stood, would have been about 1/4 of an inch in length and about 3/16 of an inch wide. Strobing real fast, kind of a wedge shape, arrow shaped thing, strobing back and forth. And it zipped across the sky behind Crow's Peak. And I walked a few more paces, and I suddenly thought, oh my word, I've just seen a UFO. Because it was clearly not a meteor with the strobing effect.
Right.
And I stood still for a few minutes just to see if perchance I heard, any helicopter noises. Ellsworth Air Force Base isn't too far away, and oftentimes there's military helicopters that have those strobing lights. Didn't hear any helicopter sound. I was listening for jets. It made absolutely no sound.
Mm-hmm.
And given kind of the layout, it was just, to my mind, going far too fast for any conventional jet aircraft, not to mention a helicopter. So it was something, It was clearly
Sure.
a technology of some sort. But again, what I couldn't possibly say.
Interesting.
Well, that's awesome. Were you a little creeped out when you saw it?
No, not at all. Not at
Okay.
all. I was more creeped out by the fact that it took a few seconds to register that I had seen this thing.
Right.
I was more creeped out by that, and when I just kind of stood there looking and listening for sounds, the thing that first occurred to me, well, that's advanced technology of some sort. But again, and my inclination would be to guess first that it was some sort of human advanced technology rather than anybody else's. While it was moving fast, again, it would not have been fast enough for any sort of interstellar travel or interplanetary travel. But it was definitely something.
I've seen quite a few strange-looking objects myself.
Me too.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and it is rather arresting when you see something like that. That was really my first and only UFO sighting in a conventional sense.
It was actually the main reason why I got into video editing, because I wanted to recreate it just because I thought that'd be cool.
Yeah, I went home and to this day I could kick myself that I didn't write down the date and time more accurately. All I did was I sketched it real fast in one of my notebooks, and in Covert Wars and Clash of Civilizations I reproduced the little sketch I drew of this weird looking little little thing, whatever it was.
Okay. So another topic. Let's see. My aunt, who's awesome, she might be listening to right now. She brought up to me, I think it was in 1996. She told me that in 1997 there would be. She described it as wars in the heaven between different alien races, and they would be fighting for Earth. And I have to ask, is that what you were referring to when you say cosmic wars?
No, the book Cosmic War is about an ancient cosmic war that I think was fought circa 3.2 million years ago for reasons that I get into in the book. Largely because that appears to be the most recent date that comes the closest in terms of astrophysical and geological evidence to the textual dates that are indicated by, the Manetho texts in Egypt or the Edfu texts or the Sumerian Kings List. And I grant that that's still a huge whopping chronological discrepancy. I don't really attempt to resolve the chronological issue. I'm simply trying to look at the conceptual associations between the texts and what may have gone on. But that said, my approach to that war then, it's still my approach today, is that if you look at what the texts describe, it is describing an interplanetary conflict that's fought with some horribly destructive weapons, both biological and environmental and press a button and blow up a planet sort of thing. And the thing that occurs in the text is that these wars are being fought by the gods, which, if you look at so to speak, their family tree, they're all ultimately related to each other. So my model has always been World War I. You've got the Kaiser as the grandson of Queen Victoria, the cousin of Tsar Nicholas II. related through other relations to Victor Emmanuel in Italy and Kaiser Franz Joseph in Austria. All of these royal families were intermarried over the decades for so long that it was one big family fight.
Right.
And at the end of World War I, something very peculiar happens. You had the Allies inventorying German technology, and in the Treaty of Versailles stipulating, we don't want you building any more great big huge siege guns, no more heavy artillery, please no more airplanes, and keep your army really small. to make sure you're going to do this.
Right.
We want you to demilitarize the Rhineland. You can't station any troops west of the Rhine River, and we're extending that quarantine zone 30 miles on the east bank of the Rhine River. So if you look at the ancient texts, they suggest a very similar thing, that some sort of quarantine zone exists around planet Earth. In the book of Enoch, I believe it's at the orbit of the moon.
Yep.
In Henry Cornelius Agrippa, it's at the outermost orbit of the outermost planet, which back then would have been Neptune. So in other words, there's this idea that there's a quarantine zone around the Earth, but those texts don't tell you why. Well, if you connect the idea to this ancient cosmic war, what you have is an interplanetary Treaty of Versailles. We're going to keep these little monkeys cordoned off down here on this little planet, and step over this line, and you're in trouble. So I think there's some sort of ongoing effect of that war, and here's why. If you use my World War I analogy again, the Allies, the French in particular, had their military attachés during the interwar period, constantly scouring Germany, inspecting their industrial plants and so on to make good and sure, that the Germans weren't building any more big artillery. And in other words, they performed an intelligence mission. So if we have that idea in mind for the cosmic war, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to leave people behind. You're going to have intelligence agents keeping an eye on what the monkeys are up to on planet Earth.
True.
And they're going to watch very closely. And to me, that fits very neatly with the whole lore surrounding the idea of the Watchers.
Well said. I've heard this before. I heard that they're kind of trapped here, kind of like you got to live with your creation and deal with it type deal.
Well, that may be, but that may be the cover story for a much more covert intelligence purpose. I tend to look at things. With kind of a jaundiced, cynical intelligence military eye when I read these texts.
Essentially, there's a connection between these cosmic or interplanetary wars and wars going on today here on Earth.
There could be, yes. I think to put it rather differently, I don't think you can understand the current financial system without the UFO. And once you've said that, then, as I put it in the Secret Space Conference that we had this last June, if you're the American national security establishment after World War II, you're dealing with a threefold strategic threat. You're dealing with the communist bloc. You are dealing with some sort of post-war independent Nazi group that's still doing its secret research, and then you're dealing with the UFO. So what do? Well, the first thing that's going to occur to you is you're going to have to develop technologies that can do triple duty and keep an eye on all three things and try and figure out through reconnaissance what they're up to. So that's the first thing. The other thing that you're going to be thinking is well, humanity is at the Tower of Babel moment again. We've reached a certain pitch of technological development that's obviously of concern to whoever's behind these things, since they show such an inordinate interest in our nuclear and thermonuclear capability, which means that in turn, that those technologies are a gateway technology to far greater capabilities, so we'd better figure out what that is and why they're so interested in it. So we're in the Tower of Babel moment again. So they're going to figure out a long-term strategy of how to get through the Tower of Babel moment without some sort of intervention again. And that's going to require, in my thinking, that they establish a long-term Black Projects research program to emulate the technological performance of UFOs and demonstrate parity or near parity with it. And that's going to require just a basket load of cash. And, you can't come out and tell people, well, we're going to tax you to death for the next 60 years because we've got a UFO problem and we're going to try and figure out how to build the technology to face it off. You can't do that. So you're going to put into place a huge hidden financial system to fund this thing. And yeah, that's basically my take on it.
Now, could there be there are probably, if there are aliens out there, and if it's not just technology that our government has, then there could be more than one species, and some of those species might be on our side and trying to free humanity. Now,
could be, yeah. The problem here is that if you're that national security establishment, you're going to start reading these ancient texts in much the same way that I've read them. And I hate to part company with the jonquils and daisies crowd in the New Age ufology movement, but those texts would indicate to anybody that's willing to read them that whoever that group of people is, most of the time they didn't have humanity's best interest at heart. So, I think that would have been primary and uppermost in their concerns.
Okay. All right. So, wow. Where do you think this is going to go? Do you think they'll eventually tell the public, or do you think they'll just try to keep it hidden secret as they've been doing?
Well, let's put it this way, if there is any sort of extraterrestrial presence or interdimensional beings, what have you, at some point, the technology itself is going to drive some sort of contact, whether it is hostile or friendly. It's going to drive some sort of contact. I do think, for reasons that we don't have time to get into, that there are a lot of signals going on right now in the public literature that indicates they're letting out a whole lot of very, very strange technology. So in other words, I think the elite is showing signs that they know that they are in this period of transition, and they're going to try and guide it and steer it as carefully as they can over the next 50 to 100 years. I talked a lot about that whole idea again at that San Mateo conference last June. And I talk about it. I talk about it in my books, Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations, Saucers, Swastikas, and Psyops, and Covert Wars and Clash of Civilizations. Those three books, I talk about all these various ideas in some detail.
Okay. A little off topic here. What do you think about the whole Ebola thing? Do you think it's a threat? Do you think they're using it as a biowarfare to cull the population, or is it just another bird flu scare, E. coli?
I think it's a bit of all three. I think a lot of it's hype and hysteria, and theater is being deliberately driven. I do think it's a legitimate threat. I do think that there's every indication that it is biowarfare. The question really remains is, if it's biowarfare intended to cull the population, which population is it intended to cull?
Yeah.
Most people are unaware that Caucasians have a particular leukocyte in their blood that makes them much less susceptible to Ebola and much more capable of fighting it off than black people, where the population, you see, it already gets very, very complicated. I have some blogs up already on my website in the last couple of weeks about this, and I've got a few more blogs coming up about it because, once again, believe it or not, there is a German connection. So take that for whatever it's worth, and watch for the blogs about it. And I talked about it on a recent video news and views I did on October 18th, and I'll be blogging more about it in the next couple of weeks.
Nice. Okay. All right. Chris, you have...
check that out. I didn't know anything about that.
I know Chris has a couple good questions.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I do too, but I want to give him a chance.
Yeah, hold on a second. I had some listener questions, actually.
Uh-huh.
Let me get to them. I had them up here. All right. I promised I would ask these. One of the listeners wants to know something about the moon, about if you think that it's artificial.
Well, we already talked about that. The Soviets came out, I think it was circa 1968 or 67, somewhere in that time frame, in a little English language magazine that the Soviet Union used to publish called Sputnik. It was kind of a Soviet version of popular science, and they had two Russian astrophysicists proposing that the moon was in actual fact an artificial body of some sort, principally because of some of the physics problems that I outlined earlier. And that was picked up and popularized in this country in a book called Our Mysterious Spaceship Moon by Don Wilson. I have that book. It was a little paperback book that was published after the Soviet articles, and he references these Soviet articles, and basically he points this out. The bottom line for me is it may or may not be an artificial object, but if it isn't, it was at least, it appears that if you accept the capture model, then it would have had to have been basically steered and parked.
Right.
Where it is.
Right. I've heard this before.
Yeah. There are other little indicators about it in ancient lore. There's a group in Greece, ancient Greece, that had the lore that there was once a time when there was no moon in the sky. You have another Hindu bit of legend that says something to the effect that the old moon broke. So, there's all these very strange little tidbits of things out there in ancient human lore that indicate something very weird is going on with the moon. So, yeah, I don't have any difficulty believing that there was a technology that may have been in play to get it there and doing what it's doing.
So where would that leave us on the moon landing?
Well, again, if you go back to the idea that there's a quarantine zone at the orbit of the moon, if you go to the idea that somebody parked it there, it could very easily be, as some suspect, that we may have been warned off from going back. I personally think that that's a bit wobbly. There's another school of thought out there that says that we did go back, but we went back secretly. So, it is strange to me that now you have this mad scramble of everybody on Earth who has a space program also saying that we want to go to the moon and do some snooping around. The Russians have announced that they want to put a manned expedition to the moon no later than 2030. The Indians want to. The Europeans, of course, are on board with all of this and much more. So, and of course the Chinese have just sent a probe to the moon, and are being rather cagey about what they're finding out there.
Of course.
And the Japanese, by the same token, a few years ago had a huge lunar probe that they sent to the moon that they released a couple of extremely interesting pictures and then just shut up about it. So it looks to me like everybody wants to get to the moon to check out NASA's story.
There's a lot of interesting stories I've heard about the moon, such as before the moon was there, before they parked it there, women were only able to ovulate once a year, so they would instead of once a month.
Well, I don't know. I've not heard.
Exactly.
I'm going to keep my comments.
Imagine that. We may just have world peace. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. Oh boy. I'm just kidding. I'm not a misogynist.
Here comes the hate mail, Jeff.
I am not a misogynist. I love women. I am completely fine with the whole emotions thing. Fine. I don't think I can dig myself out of that one.
No, I'd stop. I'd stop now.
Sorry. I do. I like it. Whatever.
I do have a quick question. Now, a lot of the what we call them the mainstreamers, the mainstream scientists and archaeologists, seems that some are now kind of willing to take on more alternative ideas. Are you finding that they're more willing to listen to your ideas, or the conclusions that you come to now, or?
Well, as far as I know, most of them don't even know I exist, and I'd prefer to keep it that way.
Keep it that way. Yeah.
I really don't have time even to debate people much. I'm simply trying to put out as much argued speculation as I can, in the hopes that people will at least question some of these paradigms. I'm the first to admit that my speculations may be wildly wrong, but I really haven't found anybody that's engaged directly with me in that fashion. There are a few little indicators here and there that some in the mainstream might be willing to rethink things.
Right.
But again, it's not necessarily in response to alternative research or anything like that. It's just that some of their models are breaking down under their own dead weight. What that will lead to, time will tell. But I really haven't encountered that.
Okay. Have you heard of the soul trapper theory? How they have a soul trapping device on the moon, and when we die, you go into the light and it captures your soul and forces you to be. It wipes your memory clean and forces you back into a life.
I've heard of theories like that. Again, I tend to avoid those types of theories because there's really not much argumentation behind them.
Right.
I may or may not eventually deal with issues like that in some of my planned books. Lord willing, I'll get around to writing them. But I have my own ideas on the whole topic, but I don't really want to talk about them until I have more detailed research under my belt. That
Understandable.
Anything I would say would make sense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we're probably never going to get more information on that topic, because that's just that'd be like impossible. I mean, the only way we would ever know is if we actually die and do that, and I'm not looking forward to that. So.
Well, neither am I.
Exactly. So that's never gonna. That's just gonna have to be an unsolved mystery right there.
Well, I don't think it'll necessarily be unsolved. I think one can make certain significant stabs And like I say, I have a few hypotheses, but I don't want to try and talk about them until I have a book to put in people's hands so that they can look at the details of what I'm thinking and why I'm thinking it until I can actually do that.
Good call. Good call. So what do you think blew up this planet? That because the only theory I've heard so far is that that whole Nibiru thing came into contact with the planet, and that's how we have the asteroid belt now.
No, I'm not a catastrophist.
Okay.
I deal with all of that in my book, The Cosmic War. I simply don't see the physics for it.
Okay.
Dr. Van Flandern, in his book, Dark Matter, Missing Planets and New Comets, where he outlines his exploded planet hypothesis, and it's really not his hypothesis. It was the hypothesis of late 18th and early 19th century astronomers. He simply revived it. If you read his book, and I review his book in the Cosmic War in the very first chapter, he has three basic theses. And the first one he proposes is that it may have been some sort of natural fission reactor that went supercritical and blew the planet up. Well, natural fission reactors actually do occur. They occur right here on planet Earth. There's places in Africa where you have little piles of uranium that are little natural nuclear reactors. There have been similar reports. I haven't really been able to verify some of them in North America, but they do occur. The problem is that, as far as I know, the physics of fission reactions, they wouldn't have near the energy to blow up a planet like that, to go critical and blow up a planet like that. You'd have to have an extraordinarily large anomalous reactor to do that. And so Van Flandern himself kind of passes quickly by that hypothesis, and then he comes up with a hypothesis that, well, maybe there was a bunch of antimatter and matter that were held in separate containment at the core of the planet, and then somehow the containment broke down and the planet blew up. Well, again, that makes a lot of assumptions. The first being that the antimatter-matter relationship in the universe is isotropic, and it really isn't. If you stop and look at the data, there appears to be far less antimatter in the universe than matter, for good reason, because obviously when antimatter and matter get together, they mutually annihilate. So he quickly discards that idea. So then he says, as a final kind of thing that he tosses out there, and you can tell that he's not too happy with any of his naturally occurring models, and he's equally uncomfortable with the final model that he proposes. And the final model is, he said, well, what if it was some sort of experiment that went horribly wrong? In other words, what he's implying is a technology, and a technology that's capable of operating at a level of a planetary system. And of course, once he implies that, he kind of tiptoes and dances around the idea that it might have even been in a deliberate act. And those are his words. He doesn't use the word war, but he uses the word deliberate act. And the implication is clear that one of the hypotheses that he's willing to entertain is precisely a technology of warfare capable of doing that. So, that's where I begin the book, is, do we have an indication in ancient texts that there might have been a technology like that available? Well, the answer is absolutely, definitely yes. There's no two ways about it. And as to what the technology may be, I'll put it this way. If you've got a technology that enables you to manipulate the fabric of space-time locally on the laboratory bench, so to speak, then you have potentially, theoretically, you have the technological capability to make a hydrogen bomb look like a firecracker.
What was the name of that device they had up in Europe? That was it not hydrogen, halogen, the collider? I can't remember right off.
Oh, the Large Hadron Collider at CERN you're talking about, yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Were you at all worried when they were testing that and playing around with that? Do you think it's safe for them? Okay.
I wasn't worried, but that is actually a matter that I was referring to earlier when I said some scientists are finding things that they're willing to begin questioning their models. I was thinking specifically of a certain group within modern theoretical and particle physics that as a result of them not finding what they were expecting to find when they turned that thing on, that they are now talking about getting rid in their equations, and this just made me drop my jaw, literally, of getting rid of all idea of dimensionality in their equations. And I thought, my God, has it come to that? Because, you look at general relativity is in 4 dimensions. You look at string theory, it's in 13 or 26 dimensions, depending on the rotation group of the theory. Modern physics, since Maxwell, has relied on a form of mathematical analysis in its equations called dimensional analysis. In other words, all equations of theoretical physics are geometrized and therefore dimensional equations. So that just left me stunned, because I've been kind of suggesting a similar sort of thing in my books all the way back to the Giza Death Star Deployed. And my real suspicion is, I'll be very honest with you here, guys, and again, I have not a shred of evidence for this, it's just merely a gut intuition, is that when they first turned that thing on and then quickly turned it off and told the world, well, the reason we had to turn it off was because a tear occurred in the cooling mechanism around one of the big rings of magnets in the collider. And they gave us all sorts of explanations, and I don't think that was it at all. I think perhaps that when they turned it on for the first time and powered it up to about half of its power output, that they encountered a phenomenon that did not fit any of their standard models. Okay? The fact that they have obfuscated the Higgs so badly. First they claimed to have found it, then, oh no, they didn't find it. So if you read the literature, it's very confusing. Did they or didn't they find it? And now you have physicists saying, well, we haven't found about 30 other particles that we should have found by now. And it's that group of physicists that are suggesting, well, we need to rethink everything. We need to look at what our equations are going to look at without dimensionality. So in other words, they found something that's suggesting to them that they need a radically different way of mathematically modeling what they've been talking about for the last 150 years, which is breathtaking. And the other thing that confirms my suspicion here is that China, in I think the last couple of months, announced that, they want to build their own Large Hadron Collider, even bigger than the one at CERN.
Crazy.
So what that's telling me is the Chinese are not satisfied with the information coming out of CERN, and they want to have a look-see for themselves.
Right. All that, right.
So, it's, wow.
That is something else.
Yeah, I strongly suspect that we're going to see, in the next 100 years, we're going to see the equations of physics moving out of tensor calculus and Lie algebras and so on. I think we're going to see much more use of set theory, combinatorics, and topologies than we are now. They're in heavy use already, but I think we're going to see that dramatically expand.
Wow. So it's going to be an interesting 100 years.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It will be.
Well, yeah. So what do you think about the singularity? I mean, that's supposed to hit us.
You mean the transhumanism singularity?
No, in general, just technology hitting its peak and then being able to build better machines on it, like robots that are smarter than us, building better robots, and then taking us God knows where.
I think there's a real danger of it. I really do. I think there's danger of a whole lot of things. I have a blog coming up about a recent statement that Elon Musk made at, I think it was MIT, during a recent interview in the last couple of days, where he was asked a question about what he thought about artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And he was just very blunt. He came right out and said, well, I think with artificial intelligence we could be summoning the genie or the demon, I forget which
demon,
it was, out of the bottle.
Yeah.
I have a blog coming up about that because I think he's, in spite of the fact that they kind of all laughed at him and mocked him, I think what he's really talking about is that peculiar interface between mind and consciousness and the physical world. I'm not a materialist. I don't believe that everything is explainable solely on material causes. In fact, I'm much more on the spiritual side of things. But I do believe that there's a complex mechanism of feedback loops between the two that we don't really understand, and that our dualistic philosophical systems have been wholly inadequate to explore. And I think that he's onto something there. My personal view for a long time has been that I think our individual consciousness or personality is not really something that's located within and because of our bodies. I think it's a non-local phenomenon. In other words, I think that we kind of transduce it into this world, but that doesn't mean it ceases existing when our bodies fall apart and we die. So I think when you put it that way, then yeah, if you've got a complex network of parallel processing and a huge network of parallel processing, you're creating the equivalent of a neural net that could transduce something into this world. And so yeah, I think the dangers are palpable.
You see, I think with the whole singularity thing, if the powers that control this planet now are in charge, are still in charge when that happens, we're in a lot of trouble. But I think if there's a serious revolution that this world has never seen, and power changes hands and the good guys take control, then this could really be a good thing to our advantage.
Well, maybe that's assuming that the powers that be now are evil and wicked.
Right.
They're certainly showing all the displays of narcissism and psychopathy, but I'm hesitant to describe all of them as evil. They may know things that we don't know that may explain their strange behavior and motivations. Right. One thing I do think that it appears to me is that they are showing signs of, if not panic, then extreme anxiety. They're acting like people. They're acting like people in a really big hurry for some reason.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they're also acting like people that are deliberately and carefully tearing down an old cosmology and financial system that goes with it, and are slowly and deliberately introducing into the public consciousness the new memes. I'm particularly interested in the fact that there's been all these stories about fusion lately. I'm interested in the fact that there's been all of these stories about asteroid mining, NASA and DARPA with their 100-year goal project to make the United States warp capable in 100 years. They've come right out and said that, So, it looks to me like they're deliberately driving certain things into the public consciousness because they're preparing people.
Good point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can't even say the next 100 years will be interesting. It's more like every year.
Well, yeah, every year, but in 100 years, we're in a transition period that human society seems to go through about once every 500 years. But we're in a period, and I've said this many times, we're in one of those 500-year cycles right now, but this one is quantitatively and qualitatively different than any previous one in human history. There's really no precedent for this unless, once again, you go all the way back to some of those very, very ancient stories. And I really do adhere to my idea that we've been in this Tower of Babel moment of history really since about the middle of the Second World War on.
I would have thought that the internet is what would put us in that Tower of Babel scenario. I mean, because the communications are just extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
The way information gets around now.
Ask yourself what the origins of that capability were. Well, it's communications redundancy, and it's a communications network that doesn't have any centers. So in other words, the internet was developed as a military capability by ARPA, ARPANET, and then out of that you had the World Wide Web, and now you have the internet. So in other words, we're using a military technology that was developed during the Cold War for very specific strategic reasons that you could not take out a communications infrastructure with a sudden first nuclear strike. Well, by the same token, if you're looking at it from the point of view of the post-war national security establishment with their threefold strategic problem of communists, Nazis, and UFOs, then there may be another reason besides the Soviet bloc that this communications network was put up. Same thing with 3D printing. I look at it from, again, a purely kind of intelligence military point of view. Why would you need a dispersed precision manufacturing and prototyping capability like that? Well, I'm thinking of the situation that Nazi Germany was in circa 1943. The Allies are bombing the daylights out of it. So what does the armaments minister Albert Speer do? He diversifies and distributes German heavy industry to much smaller plants all over the country, many of them underground, and then they go to modular production. So in other words, you had U-boats, they're big Type 21 U-boats that they began producing at the end of the war, were being built in these underground factories in sections. The sections were shipped to ports where they were welded together, and poof, you've got a U-boat, They were doing all sorts of that stuff, so that at the height of the Allied bombing campaign in 1944, August of 1944, that's also when Germany's industrial wartime production peaked. So, in spite of the fact that we're bombing the daylights out of them, they're producing tens of thousands of aircraft and tens of thousands of tanks and so on. Their problem was they didn't have enough people to pilot and drive them, So I look at 3D printing the same way. Why do you need dispersed manufacturing all of a sudden? Well, there's a military purpose involved.
I have a theory that some good aliens snuck that technology as far as the internet goes, knowing that we would one day use it to basically to break ourselves free, and that's just a
well,
theory.
maybe I don't know, but I have to be honest here and say that I'm extremely skeptical of always trying to attribute every bit of human technological progress to aliens seeding or humans reverse engineering something alien. I don't think you have to go there. I think you can explain most of these developments in terms of human research papers or engineering papers and so on. I get this all the time with the Nazi Bell. Well, couldn't the Nazis have found and reverse engineered a crashed UFO? Well, sure they could, but there's really no good provenance to connect that idea with the Nazi Bell. The provenance of papers is Gabriel Krohn's paper in 1935, the various unified field theories that were being published in Germany during the interwar period, the work of Dr. Walter Gerlach and Hans Thering and people like that. So, the concepts behind the Bell and some of the other exotic projects in this country that were going on, T. Townsend Brown and so on, the concepts are there in the human record. You don't always need to go to ET to explain all this stuff.
Okay. Okay. I'd like to think that. I hope that's the case. So.
Well, I would too.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're in deep trouble.
Right.
But the other problem is I hear the ET seeding crash reverse engineering thing so many times, and I joked about it in my book Roswell and the Reich, that if ET keeps crashing things on planet Earth for us to reverse engineer, pretty soon we're going to have to start crashing stuff on ET's world so that they can catch back up with us. It's really an explanation that doesn't get us anywhere.
Yeah. I think people don't give humans enough credit.
Yeah, they don't.
I think humans are generally good, and it's really a shame that most people don't have that perception.
Well, I think humans are generally good too. The real question is, if we are dealing with something off planet or someone off planet, are they good? And
right.
The ancient stories are pretty clear. It wasn't all jonquils and daisies with that group of people.
Yeah, and it's really a shame. It's just like, I think there's this huge. That's one of the biggest propaganda campaigns ever, is to convince the world and all its people that humans suck and we're violent animals and all that, and I just don't believe it.
Well,
I think we're conditioned to be that way.
Well, the Tower of Babel story, to me, is a very profound mythology, because what all the different versions of them, biblical and otherwise, state is that at a certain period in human prehistory, humanity was basically more or less socially and culturally united, not to mention linguistically, and the result of the divisions of humanity has been incessant strife and a slowing of human progress, and it's a pretty powerful story, and it's an interesting approach too, because all the stories suggest that the solution to the human threat by whomever, gods or God, as undertook it, was basically a guerrilla warfare, covert operations sort of approach to things. They're building this big, huge tower, and we better not let the monkeys finish that. So let's go down there and stir up some trouble between all of them. And we were off and running.
So what do you think about this, the anarchist movement? Because I suspect that it's to make people. I'm sorry, Chris. Yeah, I know.
We've been on this for like 2 weeks, me and Jeff.
Yeah. Like, there's a lot of people pitching anarchy, and I used to be big on anarchy, and I like a lot of the people who do it, but I suspect that there's a underlying communist agenda to get people to fight our own government.
Yeah.
For the reason of bringing in communism, making it easier.
I'm not really political.
Okay.
When I do get asked political questions, I always say I'm thoroughly bipartisan. I loathe dummy crooks and Republic thugs equally.
Yes, of course.
Maybe a few decimal points more loathing in favor of the dummy crooks than the Republic thugs, but it's only a few decimal points.
Right.
But I know what you're talking about. I've been kind of quietly following this anarchism movement. It seems to be coming out of a particular strain of libertarianism and a particular strain of the Austrian economic school and so on. My suspicion is the same as yours. The historical track record of anarchism within the 19th century, Bukovan and people like that, has always been basically to tear down existing institutions to implement some sort of socialist agenda. So I'm very skeptical of that. I think the real problem we have is we've got a constitutional form of government under the 1789 arrangement that we're not following very well. I think that's ultimately what part of the problem here is. But otherwise, I'm just not a political creature. I can't envision human society without some mechanisms or forms of cooperative endeavor, be they corporations or governments or what have you. It's an age-old problem that humanity's faced. How do we protect ourselves from psychopaths getting into power? And that's the real problem.
Yes. How do we keep it at balance exactly, and how do we keep the corruption out? It seems almost impossible.
Right. Well, at a certain stage, corruption and narcissism and psychopathy always eat themselves to death. They may go through a period of tyranny, but tyrannies ultimately always collapse because at some point they lose the people. This country may wake up one day and find itself in the same position as the Soviet Union, where you had the elites pushing buttons and levering levers, and nothing happens. Because people just finally said enough is enough. We're not doing this anymore.
No, I hear you there. Good call. I'm glad you said that too, because I thought I was going crazy.
Nope, you're not.
Okay. I mean, I know most of them don't knowingly realize that they may be aiding that, but it's think about it. Yeah.
The ones that we've been talking to, they should know by now because we've been trying to explain it to them, but they just don't want to listen. They're just too stubborn.
Right. Right. Well, that's the other big problem. Most people are not willing to entertain these types of ideas.
Right.
Most people are unwilling to look at the spiritual causes for the mess that we're in, and we've all made our own individual contributions to that mess. Mm-hmm. So the real problem for me is spiritual, and it's getting back to living by the golden rule, and that begins with oneself and then works outward to one's immediate local community. I remember as a boy growing up, I heard about the golden rule all the time, but you don't hear about that anymore. Everybody's in it for themselves.
Yep.
So we've got to get back to that very basic idea.
Well, you remember when Ron Paul mentioned the golden rule up on stage, he got booed.
Oh yeah, I remember that very vividly.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And that right there is a symptom of why we're in the mess that we're in.
That's crazy.
Because he was absolutely right, and the people that booed him were absolutely wrong.
I'm amazed. It's like we're in the Twilight Zone.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And Chris, I think another reason people aren't acknowledging it publicly is because a lot of these people have their image publicly invested in this idea, and they don't want to be ostracized by their fellow anarchists.
Yeah, they're going to start losing their followers or whatever.
They don't want to be called flip-floppers or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
And I can understand to a point. I mean, but if you get new ideas that contradict your beliefs, you're supposed to evolve them and maybe discuss them. I don't know. No one's got everything figured out. I mean, you think of that.
One of the major things is you look at where the profits come from.
Well, the whole idea of following money.
Right, follow the money.
The problem is, as I've been trying to outline in the Covert Wars series of books, is that in response to the UFO and communism and Nazism, they put into place a gigantic system of hidden finance. And I'm not talking about the black budget here. I'm talking about something completely different and even deeper. What that system did was it put the national security apparatus into the banking business directly.
Yep.
And it used hidden access loot and plunder. It used this as a secret reserve, and because you have a secret reserve, you can rehypothecate that reserve over and over again and create virtually limitless liquidity in the system. But ultimately, this is a system driven by fraud, and that's the problem. So, in other words, you can't address the modern financial situation, and I'm squarely behind the observation of Catherine Austin Fitts on this one. You can't begin to address or analyze what's going on financially right now unless you take that hidden system into account. If you don't, what you're doing in law is you're committing a material omission. This is why these financial analysts keep saying that, the dollar's going to collapse any day now. Well, they've been saying that since Nixon took us off Bretton Woods. So, the fact that their predictions never come true ought to make the financial analysts go back and say, well, what's wrong with our model? What's wrong with our assumptions?
Right.
And the thing that universally they're not looking at is the black budget. They're not looking at this hidden system of finance. They're not looking at the huge role of drug trade in all of this. So, in other words, unless they look at that aspect, they're really only looking at about 40% of the picture.
So, I've been thinking lately, the central banking families, they've got to be worth like trillions of dollars split among them. All these, and they're obviously not mentioned on the Forbes 500 list.
Right.
I mean, somehow they get away with not being mentioned, and a lot of people, like that whole 1% crowd, that was a big thing with Occupy Wall Street, 1%. And if you think about it, 1% of the U.S. population alone is a little over 3 million people. And
right.
I always like to say you don't see 3 million people showing up at these, the Trilateral Commission and all these other Council on Foreign Relations. No, it's more like a couple thousand. So more accurately put would be 0.00001%.
And the other thing that people have to remember is that power is not exclusively financial. The people that show up at those types of groups are not just financiers or corporate bigwigs. They're technocrats. They're academics. The situation is much more complex than just a merely financial model would have it. So you've got to look. You've got to look at the history of all of this stuff and begin to connect dots. And that's what's not occurring.
Yeah, so it's the whole let's attack the 1% thing. Yeah, you got Russell Brand wanting to redistribute everyone's wealth, and it's crazy. It's crazy. It's like people do. Oh my God, it's crazy. I don't know. What are we going to do?
Well, I'm not worried about redistributing any wealth because I don't have any wealth to redistribute. So,
Same here.
Yeah. Hopefully that changes, but for all of us, of course. I mean, if they redistributed the wealth of these trillionaires, I'd be fine with that.
That's not going to happen, though.
No.
Well, you've got to remember those people have their wealth. They don't have that much personal wealth. They exercise control over a lot of wealth through a variety of techniques that really date back to the Renaissance. But they don't show up on those Forbes lists because it's, in a certain sense, it's true. They don't really have that much personal wealth. They exercise control over vast amounts of wealth, but that's a different matter. But yeah, it's a complicated situation. It's going to be very interesting to see how all this unfolds.
So you believe that the wealth that these families have, they're just reinvesting it into the black market, perhaps?
No, it's much more complex than that. Part of that is coming from the interface between the public financial system and these various hidden systems that I've been talking about that have been in place since about the middle of the Second World War.
Okay.
The other part of what they're doing, it appears to me, and I'm following very closely the analysis of Catherine Austin Fitts here because I think she's right. We both spoke at that Secret Space Conference last June, and she did an excellent presentation. And basically what she sees happening, and what I see happening for different reasons than she does, is that they are tearing down the legacy financial systems, which basically have been systems of monetized debt and a closed system cosmology and physics, where you're dealing with non-renewable resources and therefore win-lose types of situations. And they're moving the liabilities of the hidden system into the public system, and they're transferring the assets from the public system into the hidden system in order to erect a new financial public system. And because of that, that new system looks, at least right now, it looks like it's going to be equity-based, which may not be a bad thing. So it's it's a very complex thing, but these families, the tactic began during the Renaissance in Venice, particularly because you had the oligarchical families moving They first did an interesting thing. They turned all of Venice's financing. They paid off the public debt and then converted all of the surplus into liquidity, which means that this began to happen in the 16th and continued through the 17th centuries. Well, what that means is you're getting ready to move a lot of capital, and it appears that they moved it to Amsterdam and then across the Channel to England. But the way they did this, of course, was they set up the equivalent of what a modern-day not-for-profit foundation was. In fact, the word foundation comes from that period, fondi, the family fondi, which in Italian means both foundation and fund. So, this is an old tactic. So it allowed them to retain control over their wealth, but technically speaking, they didn't own it. So,
Right.
And again, that's an old medieval model. Look at the Templars. The Templars individually didn't own property,
Right.
but the order as such was tremendously wealthy.
Okay.
So you had a kind of corporate capitalism, corporate capitalism and individual socialism. That model hasn't really changed all that much.
All right.
Well, we got into a lot more subject than I thought that we would tonight.
Well, I hope it was helpful. Thanks for having me back on, guys.
Yes,
Dr. Farrell, it was a pleasure. It was great. Good.
All right,
talk.
thanks, guys. All
Good
right,
talking
thank
to
you. Bye-bye.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.